along. Despite high inflation and waning economic growth, hiring has slowed a little bit from the beginning of the year when employers were adding an average of 500,000 jobs a month. But that slowdown is not surprising. The economy has now replaced nearly all the jobs that were lost in the early months of the pandemic. In fact, employment at private sector businesses is now higher than it was in February of 2020. Julia Pollack is chief economist at the job search website ZipRecruiter. She says at this point in the recovery, some slowdown in job growth is not something to worry about.
It shouldn't be seen as a terrible thing or a huge slowdown or an impending recession. That is pretty strong, robust growth.
Unemployment remained very low last month, 3.6%, unchanged from the month before. The unemployment rate among African Americans actually fell sharply in June, although it's 5.8%, so it's still well above the national average.
Are there any certain industries where job growth has been stronger or weaker?
You know, bars and restaurants have been a bellwether throughout the pandemic. They continue to hire at a healthy pace. The leisure and hospitality sector, which also includes hotels and entertainment, added 67,000 jobs last month. Sarah House, who's a senior economist at Wells Fargo, says that reflects a lot of consumer demand.
There's a lot of people out there traveling, going out to eat, and so I think there's still a lot of demand for those workers.
On the other hand, hiring in the construction industry was down last month. We know mortgage rates have gone up sharply, and that's put a dent in the home building business. Construction companies hired only about half as many people in June as the month before. We also saw somewhat slower job growth at warehouses and transportation businesses because people aren't buying quite as much stuff these days. One worrisome sign in today's report, the labor force actually shrank in June by about 350,000 people. In previous months, we had seen a lot of people coming off the sidelines looking for, and in many cases, finding jobs. That movement into the job market appeared to reverse last month.
We know the Federal Reserve is trying to crack down on inflation, so what does today's report tell us about that?
Well, you don't see a lot of evidence of a slowdown yet, at least outside the construction sector. Wage growth did decline a little bit last month. Average wages in June were up 5.1% over the year compared to 5.2% for the 12 months ending in May. That could take a little pressure off inflation, but not much. You know, the Fed has begun raising interest rates pretty aggressively as it tries to crack down on inflation, and there are worries that could tip the economy into recession. Julia Pollack says a recent survey by ZipRecruiter did find job seekers a little less optimistic about what job prospects might look like 6 months from now.
They are still doing well in their current job searches, with many having multiple offers to choose from, and yet they see all the headlines about a possible recession, and that's making them nervous about the future.
You certainly don't see any sign of a recession in this report, not with 372,000 jobs added in a month, but both employers and workers are getting a little more cautious about what lies ahead.
That's NPR's Scott Horsley breaking down the monthly jobs report. Scott, thanks.
You're welcome.
So where do the numbers that Scott just told us about come from? Darren Woods and Waylon Wong from our daily economic podcast, The Indicator, eavesdropped on a Florida call center where they helped generate the calculations from the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Every month, the Establishment Survey interviews about 130,000 employers. It covers about a third of all non-farm workers in the country. Some employers complete the survey online, but a lot of it is done the old-fashioned way, over the phone.
Hi, Darian. It's Erica Henyon with the U.S. Department of Labor. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing very well.
Erica Henyon is an agent for the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the Department of Labor. She is one of about 300 people working the phones to paint that big picture of jobs in America. Erica used to work as a bakery manager, so she's no stranger to chatting with people.
And this chit-chatting is really important because when we spoke, Erica was aiming to make 400 calls for the month with people who don't necessarily want to answer them.
It gets stressful towards the end because you're like, I want to make those numbers. A lot of businesses, when they call and we talk to them, they're not going to do it because it's not mandatory.
While I'm on the line, Erica calls up a professional employer organization in Arizona.
It's Erica with the U.S. Department of Labor. How are you doing today?
Doing good. I think I just know your voice by now when you call.
I know. It's been a while for us.
The way the the survey works is that the same business will get a call each month for anywhere between 2 and 4 years. That way, they're already familiar with how the survey works when Erica dials them.
And so for that pay period, how many total employees work to receive pay?
80.
80. Went up another person. Yay! We'll take it.
It doesn't happen very often lately. So we'll see.
No, I know.
Erica asks a few more questions, the same she'll ask every employer. How many of their staff are women, total payroll costs for everybody, and the total hours worked.
All right. You'll have a good one. Yep. Thanks. We'll talk to you later.
Okay, so if this is representative of the rest of the economy, then we're doing pretty good in the labour market.
Yep. I will take any little bit of increase that I can see, definitely.
Has it gotten easier or harder to get people to respond over the years?
It has gotten harder, especially after the pandemic. There is some distrust there, and I've actually had a few people that have yelled at me and screamed at me, and then they called me back and apologized because they realized that they took it out on the wrong person. I'm their outlet. I am the person that they can physically talk to about the government.
Well, I'm glad they at least apologized, but it's like, maybe they should call their congressperson instead of yelling at Erica.
Yeah, absolutely. Call your congressperson.
Erica's soft skills are critical for getting hard numbers correct. Several months ago, we had jobs reports that didn't seem so stellar, that they were later edited to be actually quite good. The numbers were revised up. And one reason for those revisions was the Bureau of Labor Statistics finally tracking down those respondents and getting their missing numbers after the deadline.
And I feel like it's about time for me to leave Erica to continue with her work.
I still have another 8 more calls left, and I'm here for like another 45 minutes.
Well, thank you for getting those 300 or 400 calls every month and getting those numbers out there.
Well, thank you.
Waylon Wong?
Darian Woods, NPR News.
Hey, it's Adrian here with a PSA. If you are frantically mashing your computer keys trying to get your application in for the Indicator Planet Money internship, we got news. We've extended the deadline. So it's now Sunday, July 17th. That means you got a little more time to work on that cover letter and resume, procrastinate and grab a snack. And just kidding, don't do that. Just go to npr.org/internships to apply. That's npr.org/internships.
NPR.
About a decade ago, Cynthia Gutierrez was in college, except she was having trouble focusing on school. She says she was in a toxic relationship, was struggling with substance use, and so she decided to take a break, move off campus.
I had to quickly figure out, where am I going to live? I was basically couch surfing after I had declared that I was leaving the university, was trying to leave this relationship, and throughout that whole month of chaos is when I found out I was pregnant. I was not in the financial place to take care of a child, to take care of myself at that point, let alone a child.
Finances were near the top of Cynthia's mind when she decided not to continue her pregnancy. But now that Roe versus Wade has been overturned and about half the states are imposing stricter limits on abortion, a lot of people facing situations similar to Cynthia's will not have that choice. And the financial consequences of that can be life-altering. This is The Indicator from Planet Money. I'm Adrian Ma. And today on the show, we talk to an economist who set out to quantify the economic effects of being denied an abortion. And what she found surprised even her. More on that after the break.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Culturelle. Did you know that 70% of your immune system resides in your gut? That's why Culturelle Digestive Daily Probiotics are designed to work naturally with your core. Save 20% with code NPR at Culturelle.com.
It's exciting to start something new. A job, a book, a binge-worthy podcast, wink, wink, wink. What's even more exciting is becoming an NPR supporter for the very first time. Find out how at donate.npr.org.
Even before Roe was overturned, a lot of states had rules restricting access to abortion for patients who were pregnant for more than a certain number of weeks. These are called gestational limits. So for example, say a state has a gestational limit of 22 weeks. That means if you are pregnant for less than 22 weeks, you are allowed to obtain an abortion, but beyond that, you are not allowed, with some exceptions, for example, for fetal abnormalities or when the patient's life is at risk. So back in the 2000s, some researchers wanted to study the experience of people on both sides of that legal divide. They recruited roughly 1,000 women across the country, some who did manage to obtain an abortion because they got it before the cutoff, and those who were denied an abortion because they missed the cutoff. And over the next 5 years, the researchers checked in with both groups through surveys and interviews, and they asked them about things like their mental health and physical health and their finances. This came to be called the Turnaway Study.
And I remember thinking it was such a great study. It was so innovative to be able to, learn from these women right around the time that they were having this very private, very important moment in their life.
Sarah Miller studies economics and public policy at the University of Michigan. And when Sarah read this study, she was especially intrigued by the financial piece of it.
A lot of women in the study, when asked, why were you seeking to end this pregnancy, said that it was because they were worried about their financial situation. They were worried they weren't economically or financially stable enough for a child or for another child.
And what the researchers found was that women who were denied an abortion experienced higher rates of poverty than those who got an abortion that they sought. But this study did have some limitations, and we'll just talk about a few of them. First, it was done with a relatively small sample. So out of about 3,000 or so women they approached, a third agreed to take part, and out of that group, half continued to stay in touch for the entire 5-year project. Second, because the participants self-selected, that is, they opted in, the study did not reflect the experience of people who declined to take part, so it was only a partial picture. Third, the researchers were relying on surveys and interviews, so they were relying on the participants' memories, which, memory isn't always super reliable. And finally, the surveys didn't really provide any information about the women's financial situations before they got pregnant. And this is what gave Sarah an idea, a way to fill in the picture of participants' economic lives by analyzing their credit histories.
The credit reporting agency data is nice because it's just collected passively. The participants don't have to, respond to a survey and answer questions and answer the phone. If they consented to participate in the study, we can track them even without their involvement.
And that was the case even for participants who dropped out before the project was finished. So basically, Sarah and her colleagues used info that the participants provided to link those participants to their Experian credit history. And that provided them insights into the participants' financial situation before and also after they got pregnant and sought an abortion. And so what they showed were things like credit scores and whether they had unpaid bills or filed for bankruptcy. And by all these sorts of measurements, Sarah says both groups of women started out on pretty similar financial footing, which is to say, a lot of them were actually facing some kind of financial hardship already.
And it's not until the abortion denial happens that we see this divergence in the turnaway group, where they experience this spike in financial problems that remains elevated over the 6 years we can observe them.
So the group of women who were turned away, their financial situations got even worse compared to the other group, which in and of itself may not be super surprising. A new mother with a new child has more bills to pay, and maybe that means a little more trouble making ends meet. But Sarah says what was surprising was the magnitude of negative economic outcomes.
It wasn't like a 5 or a 10% increase in unpaid bills. It was an 80% increase in unpaid bills. An 80% increase in negative interactions with the court system, like bankruptcy filings, or if you get evicted and you have to pay your landlord a judgment. There were really substantial increases in financial problems. Another thing that was interesting was that it was very sustained. It wasn't like it spiked up, there was a couple bad years, and then things kind of went back to normal. It seemed like they were really put onto a more difficult financial trajectory.
In fact, Sarah said being denied an abortion had a bigger negative effect on a person's credit score than being hit with an unexpected hospitalization or having your house flooded in a hurricane. Now, as to why women in the turnaway group were hurting more financially, Sarah points to a few factors. For one thing, the majority of the women were raising their new baby on their own. They weren't living with a family member or a partner, and on average, they received just $20 a month in child support. And while many did receive social safety net services, like food benefits for women, infants, and children, Sarah says states with more restrictive abortion laws tend to also have less generous benefits for mothers on low incomes. Cynthia Gutierrez, who we met at the top, says she did not want that life for herself or a child. She was already in a really tough spot financially, and so that was a big reason she decided to abort her pregnancy. Afterwards, Cynthia says she started focusing on herself. She got a job at a local pizza shop and started looking for a place to live that wasn't her friend's couch.
I was able to find a place to crash and was able to make my first month's rent and slowly rebuild myself in my life.
For Cynthia, that included getting sober. She went back to school, graduated with a degree in sociology, and started a career that today includes being a doula and serving on the board of an advocacy group called Access Reproductive Justice. But now, today, with Roe overturned and many states tightening restrictions on abortion, it will be more difficult for a lot of people to have the choice that Cynthia had. Economist Sarah Miller says when the original Turnaway study was conducted,
a bit under 30% of the Turnaway group was able to find an abortion elsewhere and didn't actually go on and have a child. I think that might be very different in the current setting where it might be that you have to drive for hundreds of miles to get to the next state that has an active abortion provider, and those providers might be overwhelmed.
And if or when those women are turned away, we might be seeing the makings of yet another Turnaway study. This episode of The Indicator was reported with help from Nikki Willett. It was produced by Nikki Willett and Jamila Huxtable, with engineering from Gilly Moon. Catherine Yang checked the facts. Our senior producer is Viet Le. Kagan Cannon edits the show, and The Indicator is a production of NPR.
Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was assassinated today while speaking at a political rally. The gunman appeared to use a homemade weapon. He's in custody, but right now the motive is still unclear. The killing of Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister has shocked the nation. With the slogan "Japan is back," Shinzo Abe played a key role in bringing Japan out of an era of economic stagnation and the lingering stigma of its defeat in World War II. Joining me now to talk about the legacy of Shinzo Abe is Nancy Snow, an expert in international relations who's focused on the evolution of modern Japan. Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning, Layla.
So, first of all, just how shocking is this assassination when you look at the history of political violence and gun violence in Japan?
Well, I'm shaking, and I'm not presently in Tokyo, but Tokyo's my second home, and I can't imagine how my Japanese friends must be feeling. I'm hearing from them now. I think it's going to be a shock that will linger in the national psyche. You've got to understand, we don't have a gun debate discussion over there. If you bring up guns, it is just visceral how people will react. That's not Japan. Yeah. And so to have this makeshift gun used, shot from behind with video footage, this will take days, months, even years to really grapple with. So to talk about Abe's legacy, we now have to put it in the context of a political assassination. Right. I just can't even fathom that. I'm working on a paper now on Japan's strategic communications and public diplomacy, and Abe is the centerpiece of that paper.
Let's
because
talk about
he
his
defined
legacy.
Japan's image in this century.
So let's talk about that legacy, defining Japan's image of this century. How important is he in Japan's post-war national identity?
Well, he's a huge figure because, of course, he's part of a political legacy. His grandfather was prime minister at the time of the very contested passage of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. Of course, his father, Shintaro, who gave us the namesake Abe Fellows program, of which I was part, he was, for a time, the longest-serving foreign minister until Kishida. But I think that Abe really understood the importance of being part of this family and giving back to society. He was a conservative, and politically I had a lot of critique of Abe's policies, but not of the man. I admired him greatly for raising the profile of Japan in the world. He had terrific people around him too, who still are part of now the Kishida administration, who understand that Japan has to take on a larger leadership role. The big issue for Abe was that trying to look at Japan's constitution and update it, and there was debate ongoing. But he was out there on the stump advocating for his candidates, and you can see in the footage, of course, he was very vulnerable. There was some security, but I know from going to conferences that a lot of these leaders, they are accessible because we just don't think that this type of violent action will take place. Now we can never take that for granted again, which I believe will make Japan forever changed.
Yeah. Nancy Snow, an expert in international relations who's focused on the evolution of modern Japan. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Layla.
Wildland firefighters accept risk when they head out to battle a blaze, but CAL FIRE firefighters are getting sick and some have even died during training. As part of a collaboration between the investigative unit at Columbia Journalism School, California Newsroom, and KPCC, Brian Edwards and I, Jacob Margolis, have this report. On a hot July day a few years ago, CAL FIRE firefighter Yaroslav Katkov was hiking on a trail near Temecula when he collapsed. By the time he got help, it was too late. He died at the age of 28, not on the fire line, while training.
They told me that everything that could have been done was done.
Ashley Valerio was Katkov's longtime partner.
And, I believed them. And I, trusted them.
My reporting partner Brian and I reviewed hundreds of pages of documents from CAL FIRE and Cal OSHA. We found a pattern of seasonal firefighters and inmates getting sick and some even dying during what should have been one of the least dangerous things they do, training.
Exactly, Jacob. Over the last year and a half, almost 4 dozen CAL FIRE firefighters have suffered from heat illness during training. And since 2003, 5 firefighters have died during training exercises, where experts say heat appears to have played a role in their deaths. And all these cases point to bigger issues within the agency.
For one, there's a culture that values pushing on at all costs.
2, CAL FIRE has major issues with helping people improve their fitness levels safely.
And 3, even before they get started training, insiders say, CAL FIRE's process for catching pre-existing medical conditions is lacking.
Okay, let's start with the punitive culture issue, because it's a big part of the story.
Yeah, and seems to be a big part of Yaroslav Katkov's story in particular. He collapsed and died after being pushed by his captain to do a training hike a second time, after he'd already been showing signs of heat illness. CAL FIRE demoted the captain after the investigation. We were told by multiple current and former CAL FIRE employees that pushing firefighters beyond their breaking points is common.
In a written response, CAL FIRE said it vigorously rejects the notion that a punitive culture exists. But there have been similar issues since Katkov's death.
I'll admit it, we had problems in San Diego in the last 4 months.
That's CAL FIRE Union President Tim Edwards, who spoke with us after we shared what we found. He says that a supervisor had to be admonished for the way he was treating seasonal firefighters.
Making them hike when they weren't feeling good, making them hike, thinking if you pushed them a little bit further, it would help them.
Another reason CAL FIRE firefighters are getting injured during training, uneven physical fitness standards and a lack of consistent training standards. That's a problem for seasonal firefighters who might take 6 months off between deployments and not show up in firefighting shape. Here's Edwards again.
Is there a physical fitness standard coming onto the job? No, there's not. Absolutely not. And we've been pushing for years for one.
In a statement, CAL FIRE said, quote, each must do his, her part year-round to ensure that they're preparing for the upcoming fire season. Our investigation found many firefighters don't always get clear guidelines for improvements after taking the winter off. According to the injury reports we reviewed, a majority of the seasonal firefighters that got sick with heat in the last year and a half did not have documented conditioning plans.
And the final big issue? Seasonal firefighters usually only get basic physicals before they start working.
In the Katkov investigation documents, CAL FIRE Captain Caesar Neri is quoted as saying, you could get a better physical playing high school football than the one required by CAL FIRE.
Other departments often require firefighters to go through more extensive testing before they start in the field. Meaning, for CAL FIRE firefighters, there's a chance that bigger, unknown pre-existing conditions could be missed.
When we spoke with Ashley Valerio, Katkov's longtime partner, she was angry.
You're supposed to, have faith that those people would, keep them safe. Definitely it shows what kind of leadership that they're willing to allow.
How to keep firefighters safe during training is a question that will only become more pressing as California's wildfire outlook continues to worsen. I'm Jacob Margolis.
And I'm Brian Edwards.